The first step in denying a genocide is to question whether it's a genocide. And the first way to do that is to question and minimize the statistics. You will hear often, and this is what the Nigeria's foreign minister says, that there are no more Christians than Muslims that have been killed by terrorists. It's a lie. The truth is that over 60,000 Christians have been murdered by Boko Haram and Fulani jihadists since 2009. And the highest estimate of moderate Muslims killed in that time is 10,000. Now, there have been many other Muslims, especially killed by Boko Haram, before that. Moderate Muslims are also the enemy of Boko Haram. But Fulani jihadists have really concentrated on Christians. And they target Christian villages and schools, but they leave Muslim villages and schools untouched. The second way to deny a genocide is to attack the motivations of the truth tellers. You dismiss the charges as products of election year politics in America or of anti-Islamic Christians for Africa. Listen, I've lived in Africa for at least 10 years. That is a racist argument, because what I know is Africans are among the best Christians in the world if you know Africans. And they're also among the best Muslims in the world if you know Muslims. And I have lived in both Muslim and Christian countries. Fifth, you rationalize the deaths as a result of Nigerian history. You say the conflict between the Fulanis and other ethnic groups in Nigeria dates back over 2 centuries to the Sokoto Caliphate of Osman Dan Fodio in the early 19th century. So the Fulani Jihad is really just a continuation that you must expect. It was the Fulani who forcibly converted the Hausa and other northern Nigerians to Islam. And it was only really stopped by the British colonialism and Christian missionaries. Well, Boko Haram and Fulani basically are saying that this was colonialism, and they are simply carrying out a decolonization process. Excuse me. Get my shaky hands to work. I'll be 80 this summer.
Amen.
Sorry. So that argument says these are age-old tribal conflicts between cattle herders and farmers, and so there's really not much you can do about them. The sixth way to deny genocide is to blame out-of-control forces for committing the killings. You claim that the killings are by bandits or undefined terrorists. Claim that their motivation is to profit from ransoms paid by families of kidnapped victims. Deny that there is any religious aspect to the genocide of Christians. This shifting of blame denies responsibility for the complicity of the Nigerian government. The success of the tactic is demonstrated in the absence of any UN Security Council resolutions or Human Rights Council resolutions condemning this genocide. The Nigerian government blames the killings on bandits and terrorists. Doesn't ever define religion or any of the other characteristics that show this is in fact a genocide. And UN and academic spokespeople blame these killings on bandits and terrorists and even demand that the Nigerian government disarm the terrorists and bring their leaders to justice when in fact the Fulani jihadists obtain their weapons from corrupt Nigerian generals. Not one major Fulani or Boko Haram leader has been arrested or tried. Seventh, you avoid antagonizing the Nigerian government because after all, we have to get along with the Nigerian government. And this is a realpolitik argument, and it's very typical of diplomats, by the way. I was a diplomat, so I know. You don't want to make an enemy of governments that you're really dependent on working with. So don't upset this new president, President Tinubu, and we want to get along with him. Meanwhile, the displacement of Christians from central and northern Nigeria proceeds. Genocidal massacres, kidnapping from schools, and rapes continue weekly. And this argument, which diplomats love, ignores the fact that genocidists are serial killers. policies toward them based on fear lead only to appeasement and further genocide. The eighth way to deny a genocide is to deny it in favor of current economic interests. We depend on Nigeria for oil, and Europe depends even more on Nigeria for oil. So the oil companies certainly oppose an arms embargo on Nigerian government, and Nigeria is a source of oil for both American and European countries. So here we are, a major supplier of arms to the Nigerian government. The UK also is a supplier of arms, and it is also one of the key owners of parts of the Nigerian oil fields. Then the ninth version, by the way, these 12 tactics of genocide you can see on our website because they apply to every genocide I've ever seen. Sudan and Darfur and so forth. It's been used by other countries as well. The ninth tactic is to claim that the victims are really receiving good treatment, that they also are, being cared for in Nigerian IDP camps and so forth. Well, unfortunately, that is not true because, unfortunately, these IDP camps are very unsafe. The 10th way, and I'm a lawyer, so this is the one that really hits me, is to deny that what's going on fits the definition of genocide. This is what I call definitionalism. It's very common among lawyers and policymakers and journalists. They want to avoid any implication that this genocide is happening because, after all, is it really a genocide? Amnesty International won't call it that, and nor will the UN Secretary General or the European Union. So here are some of the problems with it. First of all, there's a common misconception that a finding of genocide would legally require action to suppress it. Unfortunately, the Genocide Convention doesn't demand that. It was what kept us from realizing it was a genocide for 3 months during the beginning of the Rwandan genocide. I was in the State Department then, and denial was just rampant. They refused to call it a genocide for over 3 months. That's well known now. That's part of it. They thought they'd have to act if they'd called it that. But there's no legal compulsion to act. Secondly, in the denial, you have this misconception that genocide always means all or none. In other words, that only genocides of the whole, where you're trying to kill everybody in a group, qualify as genocides. But that is not true. The Genocide Convention itself says the genocide is the intentional destruction in whole or in part of a national, ethnic, racial, or religious group as such. In other words, in part is enough for it to be a genocide, and that's what's happening in Nigeria. And in fact, one of the types of genocide is what we call genocide by attrition, where, in other words, the genocide isn't instantaneous. It happens over time. And in fact, that's what's happening in Nigeria. Helen Fine, a really great theorist about genocide, says it is the most common type of genocide. We also have a problem with this word, genocide, because it has, ever since Milosevic, been replaced many places by the term ethnic cleansing, which was, it was a euphemism that Milosevic invented to cover up genocide in Bosnia. And this whole term is common enough that you see it used more in news articles now than the word genocide. In fact, there is no law against ethnic cleansing. There is no treaty against it. There is a treaty against genocide. And in fact, what we found, and we've done an empirical study of this, is whenever the term genocide is the dominant term used to describe a situation, there will not be forceful action to stop it. But as soon as the term genocide becomes the dominant term, and you can read an article that we wrote about this, As soon as genocide becomes a dominant term, then it makes forceful action to stop it possible. And that is, in fact, what happened finally when we recognized that, for instance, in Kosovo, when David Sheffer called it genocide, near the beginning of it, suddenly we were bombing Belgrade, and Serbia surrendered. That is the type of action that is needed here. We don't need bombing, by the way, in this case. I would strongly argue against it, because you can't defeat a terrorist genocide using bombing. You have to have people on the ground, and they have to defeat it on the ground. And that is why, really, stopping this is up to Nigerians. It is not up to us, it's up to Nigerians, and we have to support them. The